There is a reason modern horror doesn't feel the same anymore. It's not just because the main characters have changed. It's because the place of horror comes from a different place. For decades, horror movies usually came from studios, books, urban legends, or directors trying to scare audiences in theaters. A monster main character was created, marketed, released, and then if the audience connected with it, it became part of the culture. But Gen Z horror works almost backwards. The fear appears first. A strange image, a short video, a game with too much hidden lore, a joke that stops feeling funny, a bedroom live stream that feels personal. Then the internet gathers around it. People repost it, explain it, remix it, argue about it, make edits, theories, and slowly, without anyone officially deciding it, the fear becomes real enough to sell. At the surface, we have horror movies everyone recognizes now. Megan, Five Nights at Freddy's, The Backrooms, Obsession, Talk to Me. But the deeper we go, the less this becomes about movies and more about how an entire generation learned to be afraid through the screens. By the end of this video, we're going to answer one question. Why does Gen Z horror not feel like it's made by Hollywood, but recovered from somewhere online that Hollywood found too late? And the answer gets darker the further we go. Layer 1. The meme becomes the monster. The first layer of the iceberg is the easiest to see because the layers build off visibility. This is where Megan belongs. When Megan's trailer dropped, one moment escaped the movie before the movie even had arrived. The dance. It was strange, funny, robotic, and just unsettling enough to stick in your head. People clipped it, people recreated it, people used it as a joke. By the time the movie was released, Megan was not just a horror character anymore. She was a viral format. That matters, because older horror icons usually became famous after people watched the movie. Freddy, Jason, Michael Myers. The audience met them inside the film first. Megan became recognizable before most people saw the film. This is a very modern kind of horror creation. The monster doesn't wait in theaters. It enters your phone feed first. And once the monster enters the feed, people stop treating it only as horror. They make edits with it and make it funny. But that does not make it less powerful. In some ways, it's a lot more powerful because it gets past your guard. You laugh first, then you remember what she is. Megan is not terrifying because she is a doll. Horror has had dolls forever. She is terrifying because she represents technology learning charm before morality. She is cute enough to market, smart enough to imitate, and empty enough to do whatever her program justifies. That is the first Gen Z horror rule. If the monster can become content, it spreads faster than fear. Five Nights at Freddy's is the next surface entry, but it works differently. To someone outside of the fandom, the movie looks simple. Haunted animatronics, a security guard, a creepy pizza place. But to the audience that grew up with it, Five Nights at Freddy's was never simple. It was a case file. The franchise trained viewers to search for meaning everywhere. In minigames, in background sprites, in character color, in distorted audio, in old posters, in a single unexplained frame. The movie arrived after years of fans already investigating the story like a crime scene. That is why it became so huge, despite critics not fully understanding the appeal. Five Nights at Freddy's was not asking Gen Z to watch horror. It was asking them to solve it, and that difference matters. A lot of modern horror does not scare by explaining too much. It scares by withholding just enough that the audience starts working for fear themselves. That brings us to Talk to Me. Talk to Me has one of the cleanest modern horror concepts. A cursed embled hand that lets people contact the dead. But the reason it feels so current is not only the supernatural idea, it is the way the characters use it. They don't treat it like an ancient ritual in a candlelit room. They treat it like a party trick. Someone holds out their hand, someone says the word, everyone watches, someone records. The fear becomes social, the danger becomes entertainment. That's why this movie works so well. It understands that Gen Z horror isn't a jump scare hiding in the basement. Sometimes it's in a living room full of friends while everyone has their phone out. And that is where the surface layer starts to reveal the rest of the iceberg. Megan shows how a monster becomes a meme. Five Nights at Freddy's shows how a franchise becomes a mystery. Talk to Me shows how a ritual becomes a challenge. All three look different, but they point to the same thing. Modern horror is not just watched, it's shared, repeat, decoded, and performed. That's what pulls us into the next layer 2. Layer 2, the creator who came from the feed. This layer is where the old Hollywood origin story starts to break down. For a long time, the path into the mainstream filmmaking looked fairly predictable. Film school, short films, festivals, agencies, meetings, maybe eventually a feature. But some of the most interesting Gen Z horror is coming from people who've learned storytelling somewhere else, like YouTube, TikTok, short films, online audiences that will abandon a video in 3 seconds if the pacing is wrong. That background creates a different kind of horror filmmaker. Talk to Me is a perfect example. Before directing one of A24's biggest horror hits, Danny and Michael were known as Raka Raka, a YouTube channel built off chaotic, physical, often violent comedy. That may sound far off from serious horror, but it's not. Comedy and horror both depend on timing. You gotta know when the audience expects release. Then you decide whether to give it to them or punish them for expecting it. Talk to Me feels so sharp because the directors understand that impact. Not just emotional impact, but physical impact. Bodies hitting the floor hard, reactions are messy. The supernatural does not flow elegantly into the room. It crashes into people. That kind of energy feels internet born. Fast, direct, and impossible to look away from. Then there's Curry Barker and Obsession. Obsession is important because it represents another side of this pipeline. The creator who uses the internet not only as a platform, but as proof that an audience exists. The movie is not terrifying because it has the biggest scale. It's terrifying because the premise is emotionally ugly in a very real way. Someone wants love so badly that the other person's choice stops mattering. That is not a monster with a claw. That is human desire taken one step too far. And it feels modern because the internet has blurred the line between knowing someone and being close to them. You could watch someone every day, learn their habits, hear their stories, know their face, and still be a complete stranger. Obsession takes that imbalance and turns it into horror. That is what makes it feel like it belongs in this generation. It is not asking, what if love goes wrong? It's asking, what if someone mistakes access for intimacy? Then we get into Backroom. Kane Parsons. Backroom's videos are maybe the clearest examples of a new pipeline. The concept begins as an internet image and a short piece of text. A yellow, empty, fluorescent maze described as a place you accidentally fall if you know clipped out of reality. That is already a deeply online idea. It borrows from video games, office architecture, creepypasta, liminal spaces, and found footage. But Parson gave it a movement. He made it feel documented, not invested, documented. That's why Backrooms become so powerful. The footage does not feel like a traditional movie scene. It feels like something leaked from a researcher's archive, a tape nobody was supposed to upload, a place the camera discovered before humans understood what it was. And that might be the biggest shift in this layer. A lot of Gen Z horror does not feel written, it feels found. A studio can polish it later, but the fear begins before the studio gets there. That is the real YouTube to Hollywood pipeline. The internet creates the nightmare. Hollywood follows the trail. Layer 3, places that should not feel alive. Now we get into one of the most important layers, liminal horror. If someone older asks why an empty office hallway is scary, it can be hard to explain without sounding ridiculous. There's no blood, no ghosts, no killer, no creature in the doorway, just carpets, lights, walls, and distance. But that is exactly why it works. Liminal spaces are places that feel temporary. Hallways, waiting rooms, malls after closing. They are designed to be passed through, not lived in. When those places are empty, they start to feel wrong. The back rooms takes the wrongness and builds an entire mythology from it. The horror is not just that you are trapped, it's that the place is boring. That sounds strange, but it's important. The back rooms are not gothic. They're not ancient. They're not visually dramatic. They look like the most forgettable part about modern life. That's what makes it feel so real. Everyone has seen the room like that. A conference room in the building you do not work in, a hallway behind a store, a school after summer cleaning. The back room asks, what if that uncomfortable feeling was your survival instincts working correctly? What if the place feels wrong because it is wrong? Skinamuric belongs here too, but in a smaller and more personal way. If the back rooms is the fear of being trapped inside a public architecture, Skinamuric is the fear of being trapped inside a childhood memory. A house at night, a television glow, a doorway, a ceiling corner, a child's perspective where adults are absent and the rules of the house no longer make sense. Skinnamarink becomes diversive because it does not behave like a normal movie. Some viewers found it unbearable, others found it empty. But that divide is part of why it became talked about. It felt like a test. Not, is this scary? But does this specific nightmare frequency work with you? That is a very Gen Z horror. It does not try to scare everyone the same way. It follows a narrow fear and turns the volume up until people who recognize it feel sick. We're All Going to the World's Fair expands liminal horror into a digital space. The main character is not wandering through a haunted castle. She's alone in a bedroom, staring into a screen, participating in an online challenge that may or may not be changing her. The room looks ordinary. The internet is ordinary. That's the point. For Gen Z, the internet is not separate from real life. It's a place where identities form, where loneliness gets performed, where strangers can become emotionally significant, where fantasy and self-harm and roleplay can blur in a way that's hard to explain from the outside. The liminal space is no longer just a hallway. It's a gap between who you are offline and who you become when someone might be watching. And that takes us deeper, because if a place can become horror and a screen can become a place, then the ritual can become content. Layer 4, the challenge is the curse. This is where modern horror stops becoming passive. The viewer is no longer only watching danger happening to the character. The danger is built like something the viewer can copy. Talk to Me is the cleanest version of this. The cursed hand is simple. Hold it, say the words, let something in. That's it. The rules are clear enough you could repeat it. The object is iconic enough to remember. The experience is intense enough to film. The characters treat possession like a dare, and the movie understands how believable it is. Not because everyone secretly wants to summon the dead, but because people do risky things when there's an audience. That is the real curse to Talk to Me. Not the hand, the group, the pressure, the laughter, the phone cameras, the feeling that backing out would be more embarrassing than getting hurt. That is why it feels so modern. It's a supernatural story built on an emotional mechanism of a viral challenge. We're All Going to the World's Fair works in a quieter way. Its fictional challenge feels so real because the internet has always had rituals like this. Say something into the mirror. Watch a video at 3 a.m. Follow instructions. Post proof. Wait for the symptoms. Let strangers decide if what happened to you is real. Most internet horror challenges are fake, exaggerated, or misunderstood, but the feeling underneath is real. People, especially young people, sometimes use online rituals to feel part of something, to be witnessed, be interesting, to prove they're brave and strong, to turn loneliness into a performance with an audience. That's where the horror comes from. The challenge is not scary because it's supernatural. It's scary because it gives isolation a structure. The back rooms has its own version of this with no clipping. You don't enter through a haunted door. You glitch through the world. You accidentally fall outside the map. That idea comes from gaming, but emotionally, it works. It feels like the modern anxiety. Systems fail. Files corrupt. Maps break. Reality bugs out. You are not punished for sinning. You are punished because the environment stops working. Five Nights at Freddy's also fits here because the game itself is a ritual of rules. Watch the cameras. Check the doors. Save power. Survive until 6 a.m. That structure trained generations to experience fear as task management. You're not running. You are monitoring. You're not exploring. You're trapped in a workplace interface, trying to survive a system that only gives you partial information. This is one of the biggest differences between older horror and Gen Z horror. Older horror often asks, "What is hunting me?" Gen Z horror often asks, "What system am I trapped inside?" The challenge, the game, the app, the feed, room, job. That leads us into the force shaping all of this, the algorithm. Layer 5, the algorithm picks the monster. This layer is where the iceberg stops being about fiction, starts being about production, because modern horror is not created only by writers and directors, it's created by attention. Megan's dance became unavoidable because it could be clipped, it could be copied, it could be turned into a joke without losing the threat underneath. That's algorithm-friendly horror. One clean image, one recognizable movement, one moment people can use even if they've never seen the full movie. Five Nights at Freddy's has a stronger advantage. It already had years of lore videos, fan art, songs, theories, animation, and gameplay footage behind it. The movie did not need to build awareness from zero. It arrived inside a machine that was already running. The backroom spread because the format rewards investigation. Short, mysterious videos, found footage titles, dates, research labels, glitches. Viewers do not just watch, they search for the next piece. Obsession shows another side of the same system. The low-budget horror film that becomes a story because people can feel like they found it. The discovery feeling is powerful. It makes the audience part of the movie's rise. This is where the algorithm becomes almost like a producer. It doesn't write dialogue, it doesn't direct actors, but it decides which fears get repeated enough to become valuable. That changes what horror looks like. A modern horror idea has to survive as a thumbnail, as a clip, as a theory, as a comment debate, TikTok sound, screenshot someone sends at 2 a.m. with the words, "Have you seen this?" That doesn't mean that the movies are worse, but it does mean the shape of fear is forming. Some ideas are terrifying in a slow novel. Others are terrifying in a single image. The algorithms prefer single images. The danger is that the horror can be flattened into a symbol before it has time to breathe. A doll becomes a meme. A monster becomes merchandise. A tragedy becomes lore. A film becomes an aesthetic. But the opportunity is just as real. A young creator can create something in a bedroom and reach millions before anyone with a studio badge gives permission. This is why this layer is both exciting and disturbing. The algorithms can discover new horror. It can consume it. And below the algorithm is the emotional engine driving so much of this generation's fear. Loneliness. Layer 6. Parasocial horror. This layer is quieter, but it may be the most personal. Parasocial horror is the fear created when attention feels like intimacy. Obsession belongs here completely. At its core, the movie is about desire without consent. Someone wants another person so badly that love becomes ownership. The horror is not just supernatural or violent, it is emotional entitlement. This is extremely modern because online life creates one-sided closeness constantly. You can watch someone every day and feel like you know them. You hear their voice in your room. You know their favorite foods, their childhood stories, their routines, their bed layout, their laugh, but they don't know you. For most people, that stays harmless. For some, it becomes fantasy of access. That is the fear obsession taps into. The idea that someone could build an entire relationship with you in their head and then punish you for not participating. This connects screen life horror, influencer horror, and movies like Cam. We're all going to the World's Fair. The question underneath all of them is the same. When you become visible online, who owns the image of you? If someone watches enough of your life, do they start to feel entitled to it? And if your identity becomes content, what happens when someone refuses to see the person behind it? This is where Gen Z horror becomes less about monsters and more about boundaries. The locked door does not matter if someone has access to your image. The bedroom doesn't feel like a private place if the camera is open. The stranger does not feel far away if they memorized your patterns. The terror is not only being watched, it's being interpreted by someone who wants their vision of you to be real. And that's why parasocial horror connects back to liminal horror. Both are about being trapped in a space that should not be able to hold you. The back rooms traps the body. Obsession traps the identity. The feed traps the self. And once you realize that, the next layer makes more sense. A digital generation becomes obsessed with dead media. Layer 7, dead media, living ghosts. One of the strangest things about Gen Z horror is its obsession with old technology. VHS tapes, CRT television, analog broadcasts, emergency alerts, training videos, old restaurant, found footage with dates burnt into the corner. At first they seem nostalgic, but it's darker than nostalgia. For Gen Z, analog media often feels like evidence from a world they did not fully live through. A VHS tape is not just old, it feels recovered. A local broadcast is not just outdated, it feels like something that could have been interrupted. A training video is not just boring, it feels like a warning from a company that already knows something wrong has happened. Analog horror uses this perfectly. Series like Local 58 and Mandela Catalog, Jiminy, Home Entertainment help train internet and audiences to see corrupt media as haunted media, a distorted voice, a warning screen, a tape that might degrade right as the truth appears. The backroom uses the same language. Even when digitally created, it pretends to be archival. It gives you dates, labels, experiments, and low-resolution footage. It says, here is evidence. Five Nights at Freddy's also belongs here because its horror is built from dead entertainment technology, animatronics that were meant to make children happy. But after the restaurants die, after the paint chips, and the music slows, and the eyes keep staring, they become something else. Not futuristic, obsolete. That is the fear. Not advanced technology turning evil. Old technology continuing after everyone has stopped trusting it. Sinkamarink takes dead media even further. The film feels like a childhood memory recorded on a damaged tape. The low image quality is not just style. It makes the viewer feel like they are watching something that should have stayed buried in the back of their mind. This reveals one of the strangest truths about Gen Z horror. The future is scary, but the past is not safe either. The toy was wrong. The restaurant was wrong. Tape, house, memory, all wrong. And once you reach that point, the bottom of the iceberg is no longer a film category. It's a creation process itself. Layer 8, the bottom. At the bottom of the Gen Z horror movie iceberg is not one title. It is a realization that horror now grows differently. A strange feeling appears online. Empty hallway, cursed challenge, lonely creator, game with hidden lore, doll that dances, relationship fantasy that curdles into control, a childhood room that stops obeying reality. Then the audience gathers around it. They do not consume it. They participate, theorize, remix, explain, imitate, argue. They make the fear larger. And then, eventually, the film industry arrives. Sometimes early, sometimes late, sometimes just to buy the thing before someone else does. That is the creation story of recent Gen Z horror. The fear is born in fragments. A clip, a post, game mechanic, challenge, meme, short film, room, face. Then those fragments become culture. The culture becomes a movie. That's why Gen Z horror feels so different compared to traditional horror. It doesn't feel like someone's telling you a story. Sometimes it feels like you found something you weren't supposed to see, and now the story is formed around you because you clicked. That's what this Iceberg solves. Back rooms is not just scary because of endless rooms. It's scary because it feels like reality has a bug. Obsession is not just scary because of desire. It's scary because it understands how easily attention has become entitlement. Megan is not just scary because of AI. It's scary because the machines know how to be liked. Five Nights at Freddy's is not just scary because of animatronics. It's scary because childhood entertainment became a crime scene. Talk to Me is not just scary because of possession. It's scary because everyone keeps filming what they should have been helping. Sink-a-Marink is not just scary because of a dark house. It's scary because it feels like what it's like to be a child and realizing no adult is coming. And We're All Going to Make It to the World Fair is not scary because of the online challenge. It's scary because it's whether being seen online actually makes loneliness worse. At the surface, this iceberg looks like movies. At the bottom, it looks like the internet itself. A place full of rooms you can accidentally enter into. A place where strangers feel close. Where jokes become rituals. Images outlive context. A place where algorithms keep handing you things you didn't know you were afraid of. That's why modern horror feels recovered instead of invented. Because sometimes, by the time Gen Z horror movies reach theaters, the nightmare has already been alive online for years. The movie's not the beginning. The movie is the evidence. Like, comment, subscribe.